Okay, we're going to assume that worked. Cool. All right, so has anyone developed for anything mobile? Windows Phone, Android, anything like that?
Just toy apps.
Awesome. All right, Java. Anyone use Java pretty regularly? Feel free to raise your hand. Java fans. Okay. C++? C++. Okay. Anyone get down into C? C? Okay. And JavaScript? Any JavaScript? Okay. PHP? Python? Okay. All right.
You didn't even mention Microsoft.
C#. Those people. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, so I guess C# is a good one to ask. Forgot about that one. So C#, most of you guys C#, I guess. All right, you're going to see a lot of similarities between C# and Objective-C as we start going through that. So the first thing we do is I'm going to pull up the website for today, because if you've got a Mac and you have Xcode and you like to follow along, there are some things you're going to need. So go down here, click on Workshop 1, and we're going to be building a Star Wars Alliance contact list, basically. And so it's going to go through table views, alert views, and manipulating data sources. And table views and collection views are the two hardest elements to learn in iOS, so we figured this was a good way to tie a ton of concepts together. Yeah.
Can we dim the lights or something?
I can try to dim the lights, but the only state was on and off. So
We'll see how this goes.
Oh, that's
y'all can
good.
tell me if
That's good.
Okay.
it's gonna keep going.
Okay.
Is that better for everybody?
Anyone opposed to lights off then? Okay, that works. All right, so
What's the website?
52inc.co, 52inc.co. And then over here, we have this page where you can download the assets. I put the assets kind of in order of how much you feel like cheating this evening. The images you'll need, the JSON data you'll need. If you don't want to type out a bunch of color codes and stuff from the designer, you can download the font and color categories. I'm going to be typing them, so you feel free to follow along. And then if you just want to see the finished version so you can kind of poke around at it while we're talking about each component being built, you can just download the final project. But I'm going to be building it from scratch here. And if you click this link right here that says Join at IRC, this will take you to the IRC web client, so you don't have to have an IRC thing. That should help some of that. So anyone have any questions about getting materials before we get started? Are we good? Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and download the image resources and the JSON data and move it to my desktop. So, okay. So let's grab our alliance members.json and our folder of images. And now we should have those out there. Okay. So let's go ahead and open Xcode. We're going to be working at Xcode 5.1.1. Like I said, if anyone comes in and doesn't have it, we do have a copy of it on a flash drive for you. We're starting a new Xcode project. Now, if any of you guys have worked on iOS, has anyone actually worked on iOS at all? Poked around, toy apps, anything? A couple people? Okay. Then you've probably been familiar with Interface Builder. Today, we're not going to be really working in Interface Builder, just because the majority of tables are code-based. So we're just going to skip Interface Builder. So I'm just going to name this Alliance. And organization name, company identifier for your bundle. So one thing, if you've worked with other languages, Objective-C doesn't have namespaces at all. And so namespaces are basically prefixing your class name with 3 letters of something that means something to you. We use FTI at 52inc. Probably see where that comes from. We're just doing an iPhone app today, so just hit iPhone or hit next. And then I'm just going to save it on the desktop. So right here we have a fresh project. If you boot this right now, you're going to get most likely a warning. It should just be a white screen and a warning in the console that you don't have a root controller. We'll bring up the simulator. Yeah, and so we haven't created anything yet, so we just have a white screen right here. Let me pull up this chair 1 second, because this is going to be a long 2 hours.
Can everybody hear Brendan okay?
All right. So we've got our plain white screen, which is everyone's favorite app. So we'll hit stop, and the first thing we need to do is create a few things. We're going to be working in a table view controller today, which is what manages table views. And I'll go through the application launch sequence here in a second. And so we've got this FTI Alliance cheat over here. Okay, contact table view controller. I'll change this to a type of UI table view. And we're not going to do interface builder today, so just leave that uncheckmarked. All right, so now we have this. I'm going to move this up and put it in a folder just so it's a little cleaner. All right, so to go through the app launch sequence for you, those of you who haven't worked on iOS, if you've worked in C, Java, there's a main. You have a main file here. In reality, you will never see this file again. In fact, I've shipped entire products in which I never touch the main file. There's really no reason to. The point of the main file is to get in from the C application, and then it boots up a UI application, which launches all of your Objective-C and UIKit classes, which is where we spend all of our time working. And so you can customize this a little bit, but really there's never any reason at all to change your main method because you just want it to boot up your iOS app. Once your app is up and running for the system, you'll be notified here and did finish launching with options. There are options for depending on how your app was launched. If it was launched in the background for GPS, another app sent something to you, you can get all that kind of stuff out here. And then we create a window and we can set background colors and all that stuff. But the first thing we want to do is actually get our controller we just made on the screen. So I'm going to go ahead and import our controller. And I'm going to create it and I'm going to add it to the window. So And for those of you who are not familiar with bracket syntax of Objective-C, I will tell you what this means shortly. Okay, so we have this first one. So how many of you are not familiar with pointers in languages? Anyone not familiar with pointers? Okay, great. That's a good explanation, Skip. So all objects in Objective-C are pointers. There are no non-pointer objects for you to work with. So if you're working with an object, you've got an asterisk here for a pointer. So you're probably used to calling methods similar to function notation. So if I were to call this in Java, you would see something like a init with style and then a parentheses, and I would pass a variable to it right here. In Objective-C, your method calls are actually done in brackets. And so a class level method on my Alliance contact table view controller is called alloc, and it goes through and it allocates RAM, it gets all the memory ready for us. And then once we have all that ready, we run another method on the object that returns called init with style. If you haven't seen Objective-C's named parameters, this is a really good example right here. In other languages, you might see this: application did finish launching with options, parenthesis, application, comma, launch options. In Objective-C, everything is named. And so you're going to see your variables and your methods all have essentially parts of the method stub right before them that tell you what they are. And so you'll actually see that the method is separate phrases.
I have one.
Yeah.
By pointer, it's basically it's a reference to the on the file stack, right? That's what. To a reference variable, there is a point. Like
yeah.
in C# or object-oriented, what we have an object, and we create an instance of an object, and we start using it.
Right.
Say, so you have like a class or API where all this various stuff is there,
yes.
and you start creating instances of or
yeah. So in Objective-C, every class traces its lineage back up to NS object, which is implemented to take care of all the allocation, all the setup for variables, all the instance variables. It includes a ton of reflection APIs, so you can see what type of object you are, things like that. And so even this view controller here, although it's a subclass of UI table view controller, that'll eventually trace back up to NS object, which manages all the allocation for you. And so for the most part, since every object does that, it's really not something we ever worry about. But yeah, that's where it traces its way back up. You can do pointer arithmetic. However, iOS has a pretty strict sandbox security model, and so you're not free to start marking things in memory as executable. You're not free to arbitrarily address memory spaces. So you are kind of limited in what you can do with pointers, but everything is a pointer. So, so back up here with the methods. Anyone have any questions about named parameters? Kind of what's going on here? Going once? Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and set this to the window so we can at least get the table view on screen. So all I've done here is we created a window, and this was done by the boilerplate code. And then we created a controller. We allocated memory for it and initialized it with a table view style. And then now that we had our controller, we're assigning the controller to the root of the window. That way the window has something that's its core content that it can manage. And so whenever we run this, we'll get a table view. And there's nothing in the table view, pretty boring. And so we'll go through and implement data sources and do custom cells. And so if that page was still up there. So you can see eventually what this is going to look like once we're done, is it's going to look like this right here. And so we're missing a couple of key things here. We're missing navigation bars, we're missing navigation buttons like the plus and the edit buttons. We're missing section headers, we're missing cells, we're missing font themings, we're missing pictures. So I guess first we're gonna get some assets in here. Over here in Xcode, you have an images.xc assets. This is relatively new. Excuse me, this was added in Xcode 5 last fall. And so I'm just gonna take all my images and drag them in here. And Xcode is pretty smart, and it'll take it and combine all of these into the right things. Now, one thing to watch is how many of you guys have iPhones? I figure most of you. Okay. So you know the newer iPhones use Retina displays. They're very high resolution compared to the older ones. And so what actually happens is you have to provide 2 versions of every single image you use in the system. You have to provide a low res, like this one. I think this is 44 by 44. And then you have to provide an @2x, which is doubled in every dimension, so 88 by 88. That way it can be shown on the higher resolution displays clearly. When you're drawing in code, some of this is done for you, but for icons, pictographs, background images, anything you do have to provide both of them. And one nice thing is you'll notice that these are actually named differently, and you used to have to kind of deal with this yourself with @2x here at the end and knowing which one to load. As of recent versions of Xcode, if you drag them all in there together, it combines them, and so it puts them all in the same image asset, and you can just load it by the asset name, and you can swap them out without issue. And then some of these don't have @2x versions for Retina, and so they're just there. So we have that. Let's go in and see if we can add a navigation bar. So there are 2 elements in iOS. There's a navigation bar and a navigation controller. A lot of people start out trying to put a navigation bar on screen just because it's visually what you see. But that won't let you actually push through things. If you've ever used like the Messages or email app, you push through screens and they cover each other. That's done by a navigation controller. The navigation bar itself will look similar but won't do it for you. So we'll go ahead and add a navigation controller right here, and we'll put our controller inside of it. And we'll create a navigation controller, we'll allocate memory for it, and we'll initialize it with a root view controller, which will be our controller. And then rather than set our controller as the root of the window, we'll set our navigation controller as the root of the window. And so what this is going to do is, if I have enough cord to walk around here, I can scroll my simulator up there. So you see we have a navigation bar now. What's actually happening is your entire table view here is actually inside of the navigation controller view. And so it's not just on screen, it's actually inside of something else. And then the table view is a peer to the navigation bar. And so as you move views in and out, you don't actually move what's on screen. The navigation controller will change what's being presented in its visible window. So the next thing we need to do is load some JSON files. Let's go grab some JSON files. I'm going to drag this over here under the assets. So all we have in here is a list of the Alliance members and their descriptions and their profile images. This is on the website, so you can download it if you're following along. We'll parse this and use it to display the table view because most of you probably don't want to type in manual entry for all of these things into the table. So we'll load it from a data source. And if you're loading from an API, if you're loading from a network resource, it's going to load almost the same way, short of you'll get your JSON from an API instead of off disk. So we'll go in here and pull up my paper here. And first thing we need to do is create some arrays. So if you noticed back on the website is that there are 2 sections, which you can't see because it's off screen. So we have our members section right here. And so that's actually a section. And so down here you get to where we have friends, and just the screenshot didn't get it. And so we have 2 different arrays that are powering this. We have one that has all of the members of the Alliance and one that will have friends of the Alliance. And the table will keep these separate. And by the time we're done, you'll be able to drag and rearrange them in, and it'll balance between the arrays and re-render itself. So we're going to have 2 arrays, one for friends and one for members. And up here we're going to add a couple of properties. You can add properties in a header file in your interface, or you can add it in your implementation file. The key here is anything you put in your header file is public to other classes. So if you ever do open source or you're working, everyone can start screwing with your variables if you start putting them in your H file. And so everything internal should be done over here in your .m file. Now properties are one of the neatest things in Objective-C. So I'm going to go ahead and create an array, call it Alliance members, and we'll make one more, and then I'll explain properties. Okay, so properties. I would imagine a majority of you have gotten really tired of writing setters and getters on your classes. If you've worked in object-oriented languages, it gets really annoying really fast. Properties will do this for you. They're generated during compile time and added into your application during execution. And so these properties define how your setter and getter is implemented. So over here we have app property to denote we're creating a property. Non-atomic means don't worry about thread safety. You can do atomic and it'll thread lock things. You can do strong, which if you studied memory management in Objective-C or in C, this will basically put a hold on the object so it doesn't get deallocated immediately. Unlike something like Java, there is no garbage collector. The compiler will watch your object usages and put in delete statements automatically for you. And so these objects will be deleted. And so occasionally it comes to bite you in the butt, because if you try to log an object and you don't use the object after the log, then it gets deleted before it gets to the log. And so there are optimizations that can come into play here. And then if you also just want to have this property available so that other people can read it, you can set it to read only, and there's no setter that's generated. And so it's a great way to have control over this while shortening the amount of code you actually have to write to accomplish this. It also creates an instance variable that you can directly access inside your class. Very, very rarely are instance variables used in place of properties. It's recommended to just use properties. You can override the generated setters and getters if you want to, which periodically you do to update the UI. If someone assigns a new profile to a screen, you want to update your UI and reflect titles and things like that. We won't be doing that today, but it is an option. So we've got our Alliance members and Alliance friends. So right here is a init with style, which is what we're calling over in the app delegate file to initialize this class. A quick breakdown of what's going on here before we get started. We're passing the message on to our superclass so it has a chance to initialize itself and set itself up, get all of its variables configured. And then we check that it actually returns self. If a class has a problem initializing or if memory doesn't get allocated, then it's going to return nil. And if we start trying to work with our variables on a nil object and our memory space wasn't available, you're going to crash your app. And so we always check that the object that we're based on succeeded its allocation and initialization. So right here, we'll go ahead and allocate our arrays. That way we have some places to put our content. So when I run this now, we over here and the debugger will catch us as we boot it up. Our Alliance members right here is nil, so we don't have any arrays. And we'll step through this and you'll see it being allocated with 0 objects and set there. Now the difference between a mutable array and a non-mutable array. There's NS array and NS mutable array for this. NS array is not changeable. You can't add elements, you can't remove elements, you can't replace elements. In an NS mutable array, you can add objects, remove objects, change orders of objects, all the good friendly array fun. So we're going to deal with mutable arrays because we want our table to be reorganizable. So let's get a little bit of theming set up first, and then we'll go in and parse the JSON. So the first thing we want to do is set up our separators and background colors. Yeah?
How are you typing those variables?
Up here?
Yeah. Like
Mhm.
self or how are you?
Right, so properties generate 2 ways. One of them is it generates a setter and getter, which is invoked by self. If you call self.allianceFriends, for example, it's going to invoke the setter or the getter, depending on if you're assigning or reading it. If you refer to it with the underscore in front of it instead, it's going to be the local instance variable that you're manipulating. And so that lets you bypass your own setters and getters if you want to. And if you actually override one, I'll just do it real quick just for an example. So if I do set alliance friends, if I was to actually attempt to do self.setAllianceFriends, self.allianceFriends equals allianceFriends to attempt to actually set that, I'm going to get myself stuck in a loop because just assigning something to self.allianceFriends is going to keep calling this method. And so if you override a setter or getter, you actually have to assign it yourself and then do your custom logic after it. And we won't be doing that here, but that's a quick example of kind of like overriding things and kind of the differences in in, between self and an instance variable. There are elements you'll have to refer to as self that are a part of your class, namely elements of your superclass. So for example, this superclass has a table view built into it that's a property. Although it's a part of my class now, I can't access it with an underscore because I didn't declare it. It's declared in their file. And so I have to access it with self dot and go through their getters and setters. Any more questions on properties real quick? We good? Okay. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to set up our table view colors. And so to do that, we need to go over and add in our theming files. So I've got all these from our designer, Gabe, who took the time to write out all these numbers and color coordinate this for me. So I'm going to type these in really fast, and you're welcome to follow along or download them. I'll explain the key concepts. There's a lot of repetition while I type these in. Actually, in fact, it saves a little time. I just go download them myself because they are very, very repetitive to type. There we go. OK, so I'm going to drag these in here. So what these are categories. Objective-C is a dynamic language, so it can be modified at runtime. You can actually add methods, add classes, all of that at runtime after you have launched the environment. And so what categories do is they allow you to inject methods or properties into already existing objects you don't have the source code to. And these are not subclasses. These are actually existing objects. For example, UIKit works with switches and strings. I'm never going to get Apple's closed source UIKit to use my special string subclass that added my feature. And so what I can do is add it to the category for NSString, and now every single string object in the OS that I'm working on has this property or this method. And so what I've done here is on UIColor, which is the color object in iOS, I've added a bunch of methods that have already declared a bunch of color styles. And so now the system has built in things like, let me go up here so I can type and get autocomplete. So the system has built in things like UIColor red color to get a pre-done red. It has a way to mix colors yourself with color with hue, color with red. And so all I've done is declare my own methods like red color. And so now if I wanted to, that exact same way on a regular UIColor object that's not a subclass, I can get one of my Alliance colors that I've declared. And this is available anywhere in the OS that I can get a color object. And this is one of the nice things about Objective-C that's relatively rare in languages. Now this RGB thing right here, this is not built into Objective-C. Over here, this will load, there are some compiler macros that do this because you have to actually get your colors into a value between 0 and 1 as a percentage of how much red, green, and blue you want. If you've ever worked with a designer, they have a thing for hex codes and for RGB values between 0 and 255. And so in a way to shorthand this, we have these. And I can give these to you if you guys want them, but they're pretty available online. And they'll let you shorthand this really long statement that gets repetitive into just an RGB. So we have all these things added under our colors, and these have all of our theme colors in it. And over here we have fonts. There are 3 custom fonts we're using. Helvetica New Medium at 17 for titles, Helvetica New Regular at 15 for subtitles, and Helvetica New Medium 17 for section headers. Section headers being this little thing that says members up here. So the blue text is going to be the title font. The gray text is going to be the subtitle font. This is going to be the section header font. So we'll jump in and start setting some colors. So in order to access our table view, our superclass UI table view controller has a property declared to get the table view. And so once we have our on-screen table view element, we can start setting properties on that. And so we have a separator color, which is going to control the lines that are between each of these cells, which I don't know how well you can see them on the projector, but the cells have color, the separator lines have colors. And so to get that, I'm just going to assign it a UI color. Now right here you're going to notice that I don't have access to my Alliance colors that I made. And part of that is you do have to import these in anywhere you want them. So I'm going to import UI color plus app styles in my precompiled header, and I'm going to import UI font. Now you see there are some frameworks that are imported automatically before we came here by the template that we used. But we can add our own, and then what is going to happen is, if you're not familiar with precompiled headers, is this is essentially going to be copy and pasted in the top of all of your header files. That way it compiles in. So this will be imported into all of our files and all of our project. That way we don't have to type something we're going to be using every single time. So now when we go back here, we have UI color, and we can do, may have to do a build on this so it'll catch it. All right, there we go. anytime you modify the precompiled header, it gets a little finicky. So we have our Alliance colors, and we have our Alliance cell divider color. So if we run this, yeah,
What key combination did you use to build?
Command R. There's also a play button. So over here, you notice our separator color has changed. It's really as easy as getting the table view object and changing the separator color property. And you can change all of this dynamically when it's executing, so you don't have to reload anything. It'll just live update. And then we can change our table view background color. By background color. One thing about Objective-C is everything is very verbosely named. A lot of methods you'll see tonight are complete sentences. They're not little short things like you find in a lot of other languages. Like one of them is string by replacing occurrences of string with string options. And all I can say is I'm very thankful for autocomplete because some of these get very tricky to memorize. So we're going to get this background color. And so we've got our cell background color. We'll use the same one for our table view, and we'll run it. And now we have our background color for our table view with our separators. And it looks like we're getting pretty close, and we kind of are. Let's see if we can get all of this at least the right color, and then we can start doing cells. So the next thing would be to get this. Now, our navigation controller is created over in our app delegate because it's a parent to our controller. So we need to actually modify the navigation bar on our navigation controller. Now, one thing you can do is you can do this one at a time per instance. So navigation bar tint color, and we could change the color. And we could do that. But every time we wanted to show a navigation controller, every time we wanted to show anything with a navigation bar, we're going to have to type this every single time. And that's just going to be a ton of boilerplate code that's going to be the same if you have a coherent theme throughout your app. And so what we actually have is something Apple added a year or two ago called UI appearance. And it lets us globally set properties on UI elements. That way they're themed and look the same everywhere in our app without having to write code everywhere. So we're going to go ahead through and set a couple of these. So we have UI navigation bar. And we want to get the appearance for it. And the word for this is UI appearance if you choose to look it up. And then we're going to run, they're very similar to the method I about called, which was .bar tint color or set bar tint color. I can pass it a color object. So I'm going to get our same Alliance. We'll use navigation bar color. And so now when I run this, you'll see that now that we have the color up here. And this is actually translucent, which you won't see until we get elements on screen. But now we've at least got it the right color. But if you notice, our header bar here is white and our text is white. So we got to do something about that because right now we have black text. So iOS 7 is a little weird about status bar colors, but on our UI appearance, one way to do it is to set a bar style. And this sounds really, really counterintuitive, and it is. If you set your bar style to black, your status bar turns white. The idea behind it is because if you're telling it you're going to have a black bar, it tries to find the right color that looks good on black, and that would be white. It's really confusing because there's another bar style called bar style light content that turns it black. So, which is almost as bad as the now, as of iOS 7, horribly named rounded bar button item. I don't know if you guys noticed in iOS 7, there are in fact no rounded buttons anywhere to be found, but they're all in code still called rounded buttons. All right, so we've got this, and we've got one more. We want to set the tint color. The tint color is what determines the color of things like the edit button and the plus button. Bar tint color determines the bar color. Tint color determines the color of accents. Every view in iOS, any UI element is going to have a tint color as of iOS 7, so you can tint things. Like if you see switches that are green by default, you can tint them to blue to red, to anything to match your colors and accent. So we're going to just do a default white color because we want those to be white. And so I'll boot that up. It'll look the same because we don't have anything up here yet. But we can go ahead and add a title up here. So we'll do a title. So the way navigation controllers work is you don't actually manipulate the navigation controller or the navigation bar yourself to set titles. Whenever you put a view controller inside of a navigation bar, or a navigation controller, excuse me, the navigation controller will ask questions of your view controller to get the values. And so our view controller has a title property. So each screen that you work on has a title. And as it's being presented, the navigation controller will actually read the title off the view controller and populate it everywhere that it needs it. And the same thing will happen with any elements that are up in the tab bar or up in the nav bar, anything that's down the tab bar if you had one on screen, and it'll actually do all the animations between the states for you just by reading the properties off of your object. So we'll go ahead and set a title to the Alliance, and we'll run it, and we'll have the Alliance title. And we'll get to some buttons here in a minute. So the next thing we want to do is parse our JSON so we can start making some cells, because that's really the most complicated thing here. Now, as I mentioned, we're going to have 2 sections and we have 2 arrays. Everything here is based on section numbers as an integer. Now, if you had an application of any scale, could you imagine if you start specifying sections by integers? You're going to have sections 1 through 9 and hope you remember what section 7 was as you're creating cells. And so this is solved by doing compiler definition statements, usually at the top of your file. And so you can do a definition and do Alliance contact list members section and giving it a value of 0 for that section. And this also lets you, other than just identifying them, is if you ever decided to rearrange your table view, you could just go up here and change the compiler definition numbers to a different order, and all of your code will automatically update. This is something that took me way too long to learn. I was one of the people, like a lot of people, that went through and did manual indexing for their tables for a very long time, until I figured out that you could, in fact, define it this way. So we're going to go down. We have 2 sections in our table view, and you get a couple of warnings here telling you do have to implement these or it's not going to do anything. So we have 2 sections, friends and members, and then the number of rows in each section. The number of rows is determined by our Alliance members and Alliance friends. So we're going to do a quick switch statement. So we're going to do section, and then the case is going to be Alliance contact list members section, and in this case we'll return Alliance members.count to get how many items are in the array. Oh, I got to stop hitting buttons. All right. And then we'll do our other case for Alliance contact list friends section, and we'll return our Alliance friends count for our array. And then by default, you want to return 0, because if you don't return a value, it's going to crash, even if it should never happen. Same thing whenever we get down to make cells, is if you don't return a cell, even though there logically shouldn't be one in that location, it will crash on you. It's not exactly very tolerant. And in fact, a lot of these crashes, so if you've worked in languages, you probably used caught exceptions, used try catches, things like that. Well, the problem happens that because these occur inside of other objects that are not in a responder chain for you, you can't actually catch exceptions that occur in any of the UI elements. You can catch your own mistakes, you can't catch their mistakes. So you do have to be very, very aware of what's going to cause a crash and how to implement it. Any questions on that? On exceptions? Yeah.
So you're saying if you have like a business layer or a web service layer and the UI layer, you're saying in the web services layer throw an exception so it comes all the way to the UI?
No, it won't come to the UI. It'll basically go up its object chain of or stack of methods that are currently running. And what's happening is that UIKit is running on a separate thread with its own stack. And so although it throws an exception, it goes up its stack all the way back to your application, there's no way for you to actually catch it. And so because the table view is actually doing a lot of things internally on its own while you're executing your own code on another thread, and you just can't catch any of its exceptions.
How do you handle that situation?
You don't let it have an exception. No, I mean, it really, that's why you see a lot of iPhone apps crash. If you look at Java where you can catch just about everything, and you look at Objective-C where everything's kind of taking care of itself, you get really informative exception messages from Apple in the logs, and stack traces as to what caused it and where in your code caused it. But you can't actually stop it. You just have to solve it in your code and hope there's not a logic error. And that's really what Objective-C comes down to, is you're kind of exposed for logic and exceptions because you can catch your own, but you can't catch UIKits. And in fact, in a lot of places where you would absolutely just have to be able to catch an exception, but you can't for that reason, they provide a callback where you can pass a dereferenced pointer to an error object, and it will fill out the error object if an error occurs, and then you can look at the error object if it comes back, if it's null or not. But yeah, it's a really arbitrary way to catch some things, but that seems to be the way they designed it for whatever reason. So we don't have any members or friends, so we can still run this. It won't crash, we just won't get anything on screen because we had 0 and 0. Now, if I did +1 here and made it actually try to populate something, it's going to crash immediately. And you'll see down here why, and it gives me a pretty good error message, and it says I didn't return a cell to it to display. And if you don't return a cell, there's no way you can catch that either. It's just the logic messed up. And the compiler should stop you from that, or warn you at least. So let's go ahead and get some things in here. So let's see here. There we are. All right, so we're going to make a new method called reload data source. This is just going to load our JSON from disk. And we'll make sure and call it viewDidLoad load so that we can load at the initial time. If you get a chance, we did an entire video on app lifecycle that discusses when some of these methods are invoked, like viewDidLoad. viewDidLoad is invoked whenever your actual display view, like your table view, is loaded onto the screen and rendered the first time. And it's only done the first time. That way you can continue setting up, like setting up background colors or populating your data. And so right here in reload data source, we're going to go ahead and load this in. So I'm going to do this as 3 or 4 separate API calls, and then I'm going to show you how, if you write Objective-C very often, you're going to write this. And you're going to look at me like I'm insane in a minute. So alliance equals, start off with this file path, string alliance file equals. So an NS bundle is your app bundle. So an app on a phone is actually a folder. It's got your binary executable, and it's got images and resources and interface files. And so we go into our bundle, and then we want to ask it for the path of a resource, because iOS apps don't actually have folders. And so it just arbitrarily organizes everything into whatever it sees fit on the phone. And so you always have to ask it for file locations or paths. And if you've never actually looked at the file system on an iPhone, whenever your app gets installed by the App Store, you get a folder name on the system at a random location with a GUID as the file name. And so you can't actually directly reference your file on disk. So if you ever hard-coded a path for your app to get to your documents for your app or something like that, it's not going to work and it's going to break, because every single phone is going to have a completely different sandbox container ID that your folder's in. And so you always have to look up the current working directory by hand every time you run it. So, all right, so let's just get this. We'll get our alliance members. And it's of type JSON. Once we have that, we'll load in the data from that file. So alliance data equals, we'll do NS data, data with contents of file, and we'll pass it alliance file. And then once we have that, we'll turn that into a dictionary, which is a hash map for everyone who hasn't worked in Objective-C. Alliance dictionary equals NS JSON serialization does have a built-in JSON library, and then we want a JSON object with data, pass our alliance data. This is something nice that apparently is pretty rare. There are a few options if you're generating or reading JSON. JSON technically is supposed to have an array or a hash map as the root object in your JSON. You can actually tell it to ignore that and just look up. Like if it finds a string, if it finds a number, anything arbitrary, it'll attempt to force it into an object, regardless of whether it actually follows the JSON specs or not. And I don't know if any of you guys work with clients, but there are clients with really bad APIs out there that do not honor the JSON spec. And so this kind of coerces things into objects against their will. And then if you're actually rendering it, you can have it do a pretty printed version that puts like new lines and spaces and all the things that make it nice to read. So I'm going to do allow fragments just for the sake of it. This is one of those fun places that we talked about a second ago where it passes an error back to you because you can't really catch it any other way. And so if I did an error right here, you create an empty NS error pointer object, and then you pass a dereferenced version of the pointer to it, and then you can check and see if it was null or not, and you can take action for an error or abort the process. And so it's not the most elegant thing. So I'm going to put an NS log here, and I'm going to log out how many elements we had, and then I'm going to show you a couple things. So let's put a little log right there. OK, so we've got our alliance dictionary, and I'll print this over here. And so it loaded in all of our JSON. This does look like JSON. This is not JSON. This is a representation of a dictionary full of arrays in the debugger. Our error was nil, so we didn't actually have an error while importing. And then our alliance data was our data. Now, this is 3 different lines. Most of the time in Objective-C, you're not going to write these things as different lines. You're going to combine them all. And this drives a lot of non-Objective-C programmers crazy until you get used to it. So I could do my same alliance dictionary here and comment all of these out. So I can do alliance dictionary equals NS JSON serialization, JSON object with data, NS data, data with contents of file, and then NS bundle, main bundle, path for resource, alliance, what's the name? Alliance members, of type JSON, and then NSJSON reading fragment. I just passed nil for this since I don't really expect an error. And so this is identical to the 3 previous lines. What's actually happening is that the variable that each of these returns is being used as the value to the next method. And so this is just a really, really nested method call, but in Objective-C you see a lot of this because it's so easy to just keep bracketing things because it reads like a sentence. So now I see JSON serialization, object with data, data with contents of file from resource, and then the tail end is sometimes a little weird because it's just leftovers. But you'll see a lot of Objective-C written this way, and this is why it looks intimidating to a lot of people online, and a lot of people really hate it. Because this is pretty short. I've had some of these that chain together that turn into being 10 or 11 lines long, just because there are methods that actually have that many parameters that they take 10 or 11 lines to write out. Yeah?
How do you debug that?
So,
You switch it back, right?
well, so depends. If you're confident this isn't going to have an error, then yeah, you're probably fine. And most of the time, you're not going to have an error. If there is an error and for some reason this dictionary ends up nil, then yeah, you're going to have to break it out. And that's usually what I do. However, the first things I usually check before I take the effort to tear it down is to see maybe some obvious failure reasons, like a wrong file name or maybe a network request didn't complete correctly, something like that. And then I can kind of break it out if I have to from there. But you'll see a ton of code collapsed like this. You'll also see people, oh, I need to open this up. You'll also see people who will, to make this a little bit clearer, but the same concept is after each colon, they'll hit enter. That way each one is kind of parameterized separately, and they're scoped at least a little bit, although not a lot, and it just makes it a little bit more readable. I'm a fan of just letting it all run into a line because I like reading sentences and paragraphs, but that's a kind of a personal thing. And there's nothing wrong with breaking it out. The compiler's going to optimize it the same way. It just comes down to personal preference. And I just prefer not creating a ton of temporary variables. So we'll stick with that one. I don't need that anymore. So we have our alliance dictionary. So the next thing we need is, we could work with hash maps and arrays, but we should probably work with classes. So we need to create a couple of data model classes here. Really short, easy ones though. So let's create a class. And like we mentioned a minute ago, this is going to descend from NSObject, just a base object, completely empty. We're going to call this, if I get off this is going to cause a problem. There he is. OK, FTI Alliance Profile. We'll just save that. There's really not a lot to this. We have 3 properties and a way to set it with the dictionary and to get a dictionary out of it. So over here, let's go over to our header file. In our header file, since we want these to be public, we'll define them here, non-atomic, strong, and then we'll do an NS string, which is the string object in Objective-C, name, at property non-atomic, strong, NS string. I would use the word description here, but the word description is a method on NS object that causes issues if you override it. So profile description will work for us today. If I spelled that right. There we go. And then non-atomic, strong, in a string profile image, so that we have the image name. So we're going to go back over into our implementation file, and we're going to write something really quick that can parse it. If any of you have tried learning Objective-C before, you're going to see that a lot of times instead of returning instance types, they'll return ID. This is something that's kind of happened within the past, I want to say 6 months, is that Xcode has started preferring you to use instance type as a return type instead of generic object for initializers. So just kind of following conventions. But it is otherwise identical at the moment. So we're going to init with dictionary, and we're writing a custom initializer here. And we'll do self equals super inits, which is called a generic initializing method. If self, we'll do our logic here, and we'll just return self. So our logic here is pretty easy. We just need to assign those few properties. So do name equals dictionary name, and these are the keys from JSON. Occasionally it changes the key, but very, very rarely. Just basically if it has a conflict. Okay, so now we parse the dictionary into a class, and one more method there, but we'll come back to that later. So now all I have to do is get this in here. So we're going to pull out this array. So I actually constructed this so if we ever wanted to, we could write out JSON of the friends and the members. This only has members in it. So we're just going to have to get the array for the key alliance members. So we'll jump back over in our view controller, and we'll do alliance member list. If I could spell equals, and then we'll pull it out of our dictionary. Now, if you're doing this from an API or somewhere where you may not actually get back the data you're expecting, it's good to use reflection to actually check and make sure this ended up in an array that you just pulled out of the dictionary. Because if you try doing any kind of fast iteration on it, it's going to crash you if it didn't actually turn out to be an array. And you can do that with the reflection APIs on the object. So I can do if alliance member list is kind of class ns array class, and that'll verify that it is in fact an array I pulled out and not something else. But since we know what our data is, really finite, we don't have to worry about that today. So we have this list, and then we want an NS mutable array of alliance member list temp. So the reason for doing this in a temporary array, every time you update your data source for your table view, such as these two top arrays, you've actually got to immediately, the second you set it, the next line call reload data on your table, or your table is now going to have a different copy of what it thinks their sections and numbers are. And so what's going to happen is your table view is going to scroll and expect a cell to be there, and you're not going to have a cell for it. And you're either going to get an index out of bounds error, or you're not going to return a cell correctly, or it's going to have incorrect data. And so you want to do all of your work into temporary elements, and then one last final swoop, assign it to the data source, and immediately call refresh on your table view just so you don't get issues like that. Because this is very loosely chained. It kind of reads all of your configuration out of your delegate methods or your callbacks when it launches, and then after that, until you tell it to reload, it doesn't ever talk to you again because it optimized its own performance. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to parse these. So we're going to do a quick fast iteration. One thing about fast iteration, I think is this way in most languages, but if you're working in a mutable array and anything mutates the array, whether it's this thread or another thread, your fast iteration is going to crash your application. And so that's why we pull this out into a separate array and then put the finished elements in here rather than just working all inside of one single mutable array. And the difference in speed between fast iteration and standard for loops is not negligible. I've had cases where it's 12 to 15 times faster on large numbers of items. It's the difference between large, like 12 megabyte XML files parsing in half a second or parsing in like 10 seconds.
This is faster?
Yes. So right here, let me get the syntax in. So I can do NS dictionary current member in alliance member list. And so this is fast iteration. Your standard for loop is like in C or Java, to where you do like int I equals 0, I is less than count, I plus plus. And this is substantially slower than iteration. Yeah, it's about equivalent to the for each, to be honest. It just uses the iterators. Really? Yeah, this, so this is, yeah, and so one reason that this works this way is that although it's a one line like this, is it actually, the compiler does a lot of dumb things for Objective-C. Objective-C originally wasn't a language, it's a preprocessor macro set. And so what happens is almost everything you're seeing here with shortcuts like these brackets with the words for the hash maps, or when if I refer to an array this way with an index, is the compiler sees that, goes through and rewrites it into a really long method call and uses iterators from the language to actually iterate everything. And so it's just a shorthand for the compiler to actually expand that into a faster iteration set in memory. And so there's a ton of things in Objective-C that will expand in the compiler, which really throws off your stack traces, and they don't make sense because of how it modifies your code. So we'll go ahead and do this. We need to import this real quick. FTI Alliance profile. And we'll do our FTI Alliance profile, current profile, and we'll allocate it and initialize it with our dictionary, which I forgot to move the declaration over here so that we could see it. There we go. So init with dictionary. And then we'll just use our current member dictionary, and we will take our alliance member list temp and add the object for current profile. And then once we're done down here, we will alliance members equals alliance member list temp. So we do one final assignment once it's done, and we call self.tableview reload data to update it. Oh, what did I miss? I think I left the +1 in there from a minute ago. I did. Oh, what did I do this time? Oh, okay, that would make sense. Okay, so I can't actually run at this stage because I haven't returned a cell. So let's just implement a cell really quickly. So have any of you guys ever read on, back in 2006, the iPhone had 128 megs of RAM. It did some really great animations and tricks to run at 128 megs of RAM, one of which was table views. That was one of the greatest inventions back then. And the reason being is that you may have 2,000 elements in your list. There are a grand total of 6 cells ever in creation. So what's happening is the second one goes off the top of the screen, it's put back into a heap, and the next time you want to display one, you go and grab one and recycle it and reset everything and use it. So you're scrolling the same 6 cells in memory instead of actually doing a lot of them, which is what they used to do. In fact, in OS 10, it still does that. It'll still load like 10,000 cells if you let it into RAM just because it can. And so you end up having to deal with a little bit of the recycling yourself. I'm going to shorten this because I'm not going to use the newer method of declaring cells because it causes a different issue that we don't have time to deal with today. So if there is one that can be dequeued, you're going to get it. If there's not, it's going to return nil. And so what you have to do is check for and see if you get a cell back. And if you don't, you have to create one yourself. And so you can do it either a custom subclass of a cell, which is 99% of the time what you do. Oh, that should be, no wonder I wasn't getting the initializer I wanted. You had table view cell. All right, and it was style. Today we're going to be using ones with subtitles. And so we're going to use a default subtitle. And it looks it up by these cell identifiers. So these do have to match. And then we're not going to configure the cell just yet. So now we can run it. And it should show up white. So these are the numbers of cells for members we have on screen. It doesn't do anything, doesn't have any pictures, doesn't have any text. In fact, they're the wrong colors. But you can see some of the translucency now, so we have that going for us. So next thing we're going to do is get some names in there. So let's do cell.textLabel.text to access the UI label property of the cell, and then access the text property of the label. And we're going to assign that the current profile. So let's go and get our current profile. And since we have 2 different places this can come from, we need to do a switch statement off of our section. So we'll do our members section, and in that case, we'll get current profile is from the Alliance members index path, and we'll get the current row in the section. They are indexed per section. So section 2 will start over at 0, section 1 will start at 0. That way we can just directly reference them into an array. And then we'll do our Alliance friends section. And then, of course, if nothing happens, we just get a nil profile. And so before we check any of this, we want to make sure we actually got a profile, which we always should, but it's good to have a case in case we don't. So now that we've got that, we can do current profile.name. And so I'll run this. And so now we have names. And then I'll do cell.detail label, which is the subtitle, and do profile description. And so now we've got profile descriptions. And then one more for the image, cell.imageview.image, set the image property, UI image, image named. Now image named will look it up in your resource. You can do one with specific contents of a file or from data you download from the internet or from a URL, but I'm just going to pull the one out of our image assets library, which is what the JSON is referencing. So .profile image. And now we'll run that and we get this. Now it's all kind of shoved together. The default height of a table view cell is 44 pixels. And ours over here is bigger. In fact, it's 72. And so what we're going to do is run down and implement, I don't know if it's in the boilerplate or not, it used to be, we'll implement custom heights. So these are all defined in the delegate protocol, or if you're used to Java, an interface. Protocol is the Objective-C version of an interface that the table view expects you to honor to answer some questions. And so we'll implement this, and it will be height for row at index path. And you can make decisions based on your section or the cell if you want to, and return it, but we're just going to return an arbitrary 72 because they're all going to be the same height. So now we have white cells that are 72 pixels tall, and it looks a bit nicer, a little spaced. Let's figure out why our colors are not right, and let's see if we can set some colors. So inside our cell, we don't want to run theming code every single time because it triggers a redraw and it triggers a lot of internal updates. So if we were to put it outside the if statement, this would run every single time that we recycled a cell, which this is actually the problem with most apps, is that they have really, really inefficient cell recycling code. And so what we want to do is we only want to run the theming code once. So we'll put it inside the if statement so it only runs during the initial cell creation. Then we can just change the values later. So we'll do cell.textlabel.font. We can get the UI font. So we'll do Alliance title font. And then we'll get the color.text color on that label equals UI color Alliance title color. And so let's run that. And so it should be blue now. Still on white, but we're blue and with the right font size. And we'll go down and do the detailed text label. And we'll set this to a text color. UI color, Alliance, subtitle color. So one other advantage of these categories that I forgot to point out, other than they were cool, that you could add them in at runtime, is that I don't know if any of you guys have ever done much GUI work, but if you have, let's say, an app with 10 screens and 10 different table views, is you all of a sudden have 400 places you've manually specified a color, and then iOS 7 and Gabe comes along and says, we're going to go with the dark theme. And so what happens is you then have to go through and find every single time you've ever created a color or mixed a color with a hex code or with an RGB value and manually update it. And so by putting them all in categories, we can reuse them. We can just call the color and get it. Same with the font properties up here at our, that was the font one, this was the, that. And so we can have them in one place and reference them, and then if Gabe all of a sudden wanted something to be bright pink, like for example the title color, if he wanted it pink, we just do red, I don't have a pink. Then I can change it one place, and everywhere in my app is going to update immediately to the new theme. This will save you hours upon hours upon hours of work if you just make sure and define your colors, fonts, any theming elements. So let's get back over here, and we've got our run this again. Now we have our detail label. So we have our gray, we have our blue. Our separator's not quite in the right place. His goes all the way over to the left. I believe that's 16 points inset, and so we want to modify that to not take into account the photo. So we'll do cell.separator inset. This takes a struct, a UI edge inset struct. Most structs in iOS have a quick function to make them. And so I can give it a top and a left, a bottom and a right. And then that should fix our issues there. So now they align over to the left. And then we can set background colors. Now, one mildly annoying thing is that to do effective background colors in selected states, you have to actually create a couple of views, a background view and a selected background view. And here's a new shortcut. Most of you probably use the new keyword in languages. All objects have a new class method on them, and it's the equivalent of calling just the plain initializer. It's the same thing as calling alloc and init. So you can do a custom one if you want, but you can also just do UI view new and get the exact same thing as a generic alloc and init. And so we'll do the same thing for the selected background view so that we can do a selected color. And so now that we have these two UI views assigned, views have a background property, just like we changed our table view background color. And so we can do cell.backgroundView.background color equals. And we'll do our UI color, and we'll get our Alliance cell background color. So now we have dark gray. And then for our selected state, Gabe has given us a slightly less gray Alliance background color. So now we have a selected. So now it looks a lot more like our table that we have from the picture. There's still this white thing over here. Doesn't quite have all the controls yet. We can click it, it changes color. So to fix the white thing, it turns out that whenever you set a separator inset, what's happened is that line that normally covers the bottom part of your view is now all of a sudden shortened, and so your cell, not the background view, the actual cell itself is showing through, and the cell is white by default. And so we just want to do one more color and do background color for that actual view, and we can do the UI color Alliance cell background color, and that'll fix our white line issue. Still doesn't do much, but it's here, and it's all themed correctly. So the next thing is, let's get some buttons in. So up here, we already have some buttons. And specifically, this is one of them that's built in that you just have to uncomment if you want it. And we're going to change it from the right bar button to the left bar button. And again, so right here you have your self, which is our view controller. You have a navigation item. And this is an object that the navigation controller observes to populate things on the nav controller so that we don't manually set them ourselves. So on this, we're going to set the top left bar button item, which will be right up here. to be an edit button that's linked to the table view. So when we press it, it'll start like batch editing, and whenever we press it again, it'll stop editing. You've probably seen this in the messages or email app where you can like mass select and mass delete things. So that'll enable that. Now right now, I don't know it's going to really do anything because we haven't implemented deleting anything, so it's not going to let me delete anything. But one thing to notice is that a lot of these features like the animations over, the ability to actually get the delete sliders, the slide to delete once we enable it, all this is included. In fact, it's actually kind of mandatory. UIKit and iOS is very opinionated about how your UI should work. And so there's really no other way to do this. You can't customize the system. You can't change the animation curve. You can't change the color of the delete button. It is very, very opinionated. Just like up here as these go through this translucent bar. On your phone, they'll blur. On the simulator, they don't blur. If you give it a color, like let's say I gave it a very, very specific blue color, it's going to take my color as a suggestion and then make its own blue color. Because it wants to make it blurry and show light through, and so it makes an informed, educated guess, which drove us nuts when iOS 7 came out, because all of a sudden our blue was no longer our blue. And in fact, Facebook wrote up an article on how they did it, is they basically had to put their own, like a color swatch layer behind the navigation bar to get it to be the purple they wanted. And to make matters worse, they said, oh, we'll fix that, and they rolled out iOS 7.1 and fixed it, and now everyone's hacks they used to get their colors now broke everything. And so we have all these versions running out there with things just half broken in them from just a color change, just something as easy as that everyone had to take into account for an OS version. Let's run down, let's implement slide to delete. That's a fun one. So there's two things we need to implement, and that's whether or not you're allowed to edit this row, and we want to return yes if we can edit it. And then we want to be able to commit an editing style, which is also a table view delegate method. And we don't want to deal with insertion, so I'm going to lop off insertion here. And so it's already got some pre-done code here. So this method on the table view will take care of animating out the delete itself for us. We just need to remove it from our data source where it tells us. So we'll do a quick switch here and determine what we need to remove. So we'll take the section of the row that we're going to do, indexPath.section. See if it's a member section, in which case we want to remove it from our members array. Remove object at index, and we'll remove the row, so indexPath.row. And then we'll do alliance friend section. So these lines look very similar, but if you don't actually determine the array, since we're balancing between two arrays, you're going to get the wrong thing. And one other thing that you'll want to do is take this, and although this is going to run identically in every case, you don't want it to run if for some magical reason it didn't find an element or a section you didn't expect came up. Because if you tell the table view you delete a row and you don't actually remove it from the data source when it refreshes it, it'll crash your app. So we want to call this only in the two events that we actually update something. And so now I can go and I can delete Luke Skywalker and he'll go away. And if I were to actually hit the edit button and hit this and hit delete, they would actually go away. And it takes care of all the animation for you, all the editing states, all the slide over to actually open the delete button, everything. And you'll see that that top button for the edit thing, it changes automatically because it's built into the view controller. And you'll also notice that it goes from just an edit button of a regular font to using medium. And these are the little subtle things that the OS does that really don't have any control over, but it really is kind of the difference between whether your app feels like an iOS app or whether your app feels like something someone kind of cobbled together without understanding the APIs. And so you'll slowly start to learn that there's a lot of things that iOS has opinions on and is very, very good at doing. And animations is one of them. So we already have that. So let's do rearranging. Rearranging is fun. So we want to tell it that these are reorderable. So we'll uncomment the can move row to index path and just return yes. Not sure why that didn't turn the right color. Okay. And so now that we're responsible for moving the rows, well, we're moving between arrays, not just amongst one array. And so we actually have to do a little bit of work here. Not too bad, but enough. I'm going to grab this reference sheet so that I don't make this crash in front of you. There we go. All right, so the first thing we need to do is get our profile. Now, the problem is that we don't know what array this is coming from. And so we do have to move it to the next array. So if we just take it out of an array at an index and don't ever save a pointer to it, we're just going to lose the object, and then we can't put it in the new array and rearrange it. So we need to find it first. So we'll get a switch statement, and we'll do our from index path dot section so that we can figure out which array it's going to be in. Let's do members first. and we'll do current profile equals alliance members index from index path dot row, so we get it out of the where we're starting from. And then we'll do one for our friends section in case it came from the friends section. And then we don't need the default. But before we continue, we do need to make sure we actually got something. So we want to do only if this exists. If an object is nil, it evaluates to false, being 0. So you can just check for the object with an if statement. You can also do not current profile if you want to make sure it is nil, kind of like what we did with the cell up here. We did if not cell to make sure that we needed to make one in that case. So if current profile, so we do have one, we want to go ahead and remove it from the previous array. And so we need to know, we're going to remove this. So we'll do alliance members, remove object, current profile. Now, there is a possible bug this will introduce. It won't in this particular implementation, but it could. Is if you don't do remove object at index and you just generically remove an object, you can have an object more than once in your in a collection. And so what would happen is, let's say it was index 1, 5, and 7, is that if I deleted object, it would remove it from all 3 indexes instead of just the one where we did. And so usually you'll want to do index, delete a specific index, not delete the object. But in this case, it doesn't really matter. So if current profile, then we'll put another switch statement. I'm just going to copy this, and then we will insert it back into the array. So here we'll do alliance friends, insert object, current profile at index to index path dot row.
By deleting, you are removing it from the UI, or you are removing the data source itself?
This is removing it from the data source. This is actually moving, not just removing. The deleting, the table view takes care of the delete animation for you whenever it determines it wants to be deleted, and it just notifies you, I'm deleting this, you should update your data source. And if you don't stay in sync with it, eventually it'll catch up and crash on you. And so if it says delete, you want it delete. Since we implemented the can move row at index path, it added these little grab handles over here. And so we can click one and rearrange it. And whenever we drop it, it'll call that move row at index path and have us exchange it. And so I'm going to put in a couple of section headers here in a second so we can actually move them between sections.
So when you modify the data source, you have to call refresh?
Yes. Yeah, you do have to call reload data. Now, you don't in this case. Because the table view was triggering the change in the data source, is it already knew and expected you to change your data source, so it was okay. But if you were to arbitrarily delete elements on your own, of your own code, you'd have to tell a table view to either delete, animate, delete them, or just reload the data altogether. So let's do, first let's tell how we want these. We're going to do some section headers so we can see the section divisions. And this is another delegate method. So height for header and section. We're just going to do a global 22 points. Points versus pixels. I probably should have mentioned this earlier. In Retina devices, 1 point is equal to 2 pixels. In non-Retina devices, 1 point is equal to 1 pixel. And so with the goal being that you can work on all of your devices at the same time in points, and it will just render at the number of pixels natively that it needs. So technically, although this phone right here is 640 pixels wide, it's still 320 points like the original iPhone. It's just that whenever you draw vectors or images, it's going to sample it at a higher rate. And it helps keep a lot of your logic easier. Same with working with images. If you're ever working with Retina images, they're still referred to as their smaller half-dimension sizes. And so this is all this is in reality going to be 44 points. It's still 22 here, or 44 pixels will be 22 here. So let's go ahead and return a view so we can do a header. Table view, and we have header and section. And so it's just any kind of view. You can use anything that descends from UI view here. Switches, labels, buttons, really anything that can be displayed can be passed as a section header. We're just going to do a view with a label in it. So and then I am going to give it a size, though. That is right. Because we're going to be doing some auto resizing things, so we want to have a little bit of size here. So a CGRect is a struct, and it's how you define rectangles on screen for elements and just about everything else. CGRect make is a short function to do this. The table view is going to take whatever we hand it and resize it automatically and apply transforms, a bunch of other things to it. But I like giving it kind of a base approximate size just so I can set up my resizing code and kind of roughly know how everything's going to auto lay out once it triggers. So we'll do tableview.bounds. So this is where I wish I had a whiteboard up here. So when you're working in coordinate systems, any UI element on screen has its own coordinate system inside of itself. So if I'm, for example, looking at, we'll use the screen for example, is that top left corner is 0, 0, bottom right corner is 1920 by 1080. And so that's the coordinate system for that. But my Xcode window here, although it has a location in that coordinate space, like let's say, I'm making up a number here, let's say the top left corner of my Xcode window started at 200, 200 in the screen overall. What's actually going on is that the Xcode window itself also contains a coordinate system, and it's starting at 0, 0 at the top left of the Xcode window. And so then everything inside of the Xcode window will refer to that coordinate system, and so they keep going down as a hierarchy. So you're always referring to the coordinate system right above it. But the problem becomes that for some reason, if you apply any kind of 3D transform, whether it be a rotation, a perspective change, interface orientation change, the frame property that tells you where you are on screen is undefined. You can't set it, you can't read it, you have no idea where your element is other than the center point. And so something to be careful of, but you also kind of lose reference. And so everything, instead of working in the global frame for where that is, which is what a lot of people did in iOS 2 and 3, is you work in bounds, which is the internal coordinate system to that view. So if I want to know how wide something is, like let's say I want to put let's say another view inside of my Xcode window, is instead of knowing where it is in its parent coordinate system or measuring it, getting the parent size and width and height, is I can actually get the internal coordinate system size and width and height so that I can base my calculations off of that because that's always defined. And so you'll see me making some coordinate system references, and anytime I use bounds, I'm working in the local coordinate system. Anytime I use frame, I'm working in the parent coordinate system, just to make that clear.
And for anybody that has a more math-based background, those two frames of reference are actually based off of vector addition. So you're just taking the equivalent of a three-dimensional vector and you're adding them together to get from your local to your global coordinate system. And so if you're familiar with the mathematics behind that, that is the concept they chose to go with.
There you go. See, the more you know. I didn't know that. I knew I was adding something. I know. All right. So, fun math lesson. There are methods to convert between this, which is why I didn't know. On any arbitrary view, there is a convert rectangle from object that will do this for you, so you don't have to do the vector addition yourself. So let's go back into this. Let's get back over here, and we'll do this label. And this is actually getting pretty near to the end. There's still one or two little things, depending on how we hit with time, but these are really the major elements of a table view. And you can see I'm using the bounds here so that I can get this. In this case, I'm just going to give this a 22-point height. So, oh yeah, you want that bracket. All right, we'll create a UI label so we can put a label in it. We'll call this title label. And so we want our label to have a frame just for approximating here. We want it to be 16 inset like our separators. We want it to have 0 for y, and the width will just be the tableview.bounds.size.width minus the 16 we just used, and we'll just make it the full height. And so once we've got that, we can set a couple of properties, like we want it to be transparent. So we'll set it the background color to clear. We use title label.font equals UI font, and then we have our alliance fonts. So we have our section header font that we defined. Then we have title label.text color. And so this UI label object is the exact same thing as the cell that we did up here. These cell.text label. And so you have all of the same properties. Equals UI color, alliance, and then we've got our navigator. Which one was that? Go navigation bar color. I don't remember exactly what it is. And then so we'll do section header view, add subview, and this is what adds one element onto another and also merges their coordinate systems for display. So we'll add the title label to that, and we'll return section header view. And so the one thing we do need to do is set a value to the title label because it doesn't really know what it is yet. So we'll do one more switch statement, and we'll do a section. And we'll do the alliance member section. In that case, we'll do title label dot text equals members, and then we will do alliance friends section title label dot text equals friends. So I forgot to set the color of the section header view, so we'll do section header view dot background color equals UI color, and then alliance, and then we've got a believe it's that one. Actually, I think I got that backwards. Section cell divider color. Yeah. Huh?
The text color is white.
Oh, no wonder I couldn't find that one. Good call. Because I was using the divider color here. So okay. So now I have this, and so it's putting it there. You can put any arbitrary view you want. You can put buttons in it if you want to. And then let me make this a little smaller on the scale so you can actually see. There's a friends one down here. I just don't have any friends yet. And so we'll open this, and we can actually drag one down into friends. And so now we put it in here. And what's cool is, as simple as that was dragging, and what did I do here? So this is a very good example of what happens whenever you don't update your data sources correctly, is that the next time the array checks. So, okay, so alliance friends, it doesn't like that was there. So I've done something in my move row at index path. So insert object current profile here, members, friends, members. Okay, so this would be a good time to check out the debugger and see what's going on. So we can hit edit, drag this down here back into friends, drop it, hit done, and then it never ran, evidently, so that never got removed. So the better question is, why didn't that run? So our friend section, so in my copy and pasting, I forgot to change this to index path instead of from index path, which is totally going to run the wrong thing. So now we have this, I can scroll down and I should be able to move this without issue, and it will balance into the other array. Yeah, there we go. And so this is now, you've got two arrays. We put one of them from the members array into the friends array. And then you can still, of course, delete them and they'll eliminate out. So let's see, we got about 20 more minutes. I think that's enough time to add people. So let's run over. I'm going to copy and paste one thing. Please don't kill me. So it's in our downloads folder, and this is included in the project if you want to download it. I just didn't quite get time to write this time. Is this method right here. And I'm going to walk you through it even if we don't have time to actually write it by hand. So have any of you guys played with iOS 8 at all? Anyone got iOS 8 on their phone? Anyone? Hey, okay, cool. So I'm going to hold this up the best I can. At the top of iOS 8, for your recent contacts, there are circles that have the initials of the contacts that you're talking with recently if you don't have a profile picture. And so what I wrote a little method to do here is it mimics that effect. And so at the top of iOS 8, it's got your recent contacts. And so if you haven't got a profile picture, it'll show your initials. I'm not sure why they went with initials, but hey. So what this does is this opens up this opens up an image context, and it will draw a circle in the middle of the screen, and then it will go through and calculate the initials from your name that it knows. And then it will draw them centered inside the circle, and then turn the circle into an actual picture, and then return the picture so we can use it as a profile picture. Just because as we start manually entering things, we weren't getting into the camera, so this was a nice, quick, easy solution. So let's run back over here, and let's do a quick add a method here. So void, let's do the add person, and ID being the generic object here. So really anything can call this. So we're going to add people from an alert. So we're going to do a UI alert view alert. We're going to allocate it and initialize it. And we're just going to call title add person. Not going to give it a message, so we can just pass nil. Deleg's going to be self, so we're going to be the ones receiving the callbacks for when the alert view finishes. Cancel button of title cancel, and then add for the affirmative action. So we do need to change a couple things about this alert. By default, alerts don't have any text fields in them, which we'll need. So we're going to change the alert view style to UI alert view style login and password input. Now, this is going to suck because the password field is going to have the little dots in it. If you ever typed in web browsers, everything has dots. I want 2 regular text fields. Now, you're about to see possibly the dumbest API that I think has ever been written for any platform. They got tacked on like a year ago, right after I typed this little definition here. So I've defined a tag number here for my add person alert view, because what happens is this is a local scope variable. This doesn't actually block your main thread or any thread. So whenever I launch this and it's going to make a callback, I have to have a way to identify this alert, because all of your alerts come back into the same callback method. And so you tag it with a number. In this case, we're going to tag it with add person alert view so that we can check it here in a minute. And now on to the worst designed API ever. As you set the alert view style, you get text fields added to it, just arbitrarily. There's no properties or anything for them. It just adds text views. And so if I do alert, I can do text field at index and give it an index number. And in the documentation, it defines an index number and what's actually at that index depending on what styles you pass it. And so you could pass it any arbitrary number and it's going to throw you an error unless it's the specific style and number at once in this particular use case. Why they didn't say .login form or .password form, I will never know. But they didn't, so I have to address everything, get text field at index 0. In this case, I'm going to get the first one so I can get the password one in this case because I don't want it to have the little dots. So I'm going to turn off secure text entry. And then we're going to go down and we want to put some prompts on it. So we'll do alert, text field at index 0, set placeholder text. This actually gets a text field object out of the system. And we'll do name for the placeholder for that one, and we'll do alert, text field index 1, set placeholder, and we'll do description. And then after that's done, we'll just prompt the alert. And this doesn't block, so this is going to return and exit this method immediately. And now that we have alert view, it's going to call us back. We do want to do an alert view delegate, which is to say we do implement the protocol for the alert view. And so we're going to run down here, and we're going to implement the alert view. So alert view will dismiss with button index to say a button was pressed. And then we'll check and see if our alert view's tag matches. That way we can know what action to take. Because otherwise we have no way to identify what this alert view was actually supposed to do. And in this case, we're just going to create an object and add it to the friends section. So we're going to do if button index that we got for the pressed button is not equal to the alert view's cancel button index, then we can run some code. So we're just going to create a blank FTI Alliance profile, get a profile, and we'll just do a generic initialization this time. And then we will go through and get the name. So we'll do new profile, profile.name equals, and then we'll get the alert views text field at index 0 and its text value out of the text field. And we'll do profile description, and we'll do the same thing.
So the concept of alert views to give like a pop-up message or something?
Yeah, it's basically the pop-up bubble that comes up. If you make like an App Store purchase or you get a message or an error from the system, it's just the pop-up bubble.
And they can't do anything else?
They can get text fields. There are 2 different types of text field styles you can put in them. Used to, you could add your own subviews and put your own things in them, and then Apple stopped that in iOS 7, so they really do like one thing. And in fact, they're going away in iOS 8 in favor of a new class that effectively does the same thing.
So if you have like alert view and you press the home screen,
It goes away with your app.
okay,
It's part of your app's window.
it will close the app, or once you come back to the app, it will be still.
It'll still be there.
Okay.
Yeah, it's an overlay, so you have your.
Running in the back.
So your app freezes in the background. You're not actually running. It's like if you suspended your computer. Yeah, it just suspends the application and writes it to disk. But it does keep the state. So in this case, yeah, so it does as long as system resources allow. If the system runs low on RAM for something else like a game you're playing, it will delete it and give you a message so you can like save yourself to disk in case you do want to try to recover later. But by default, it will just close out.
And is that like a protected, you said that they're making it in the next
Mhm.
installment that it's a definite, so that's like a protected code.
Which part of it? The background stuff? Yeah, so have you seen any of the sandboxing stuff on iOS?
No,
Oh, okay.
I went away with iOS with i3.
Ah, got it. Okay, so in case you guys aren't familiar, like on your computer, if you write a program, you pretty much have free reign to the OS. You can write files anywhere, read any files. Whenever you're writing iPhone apps, you're restricted to your applications folder. You can't read the system, you can't look at other applications folders, you can't look at documents, can't look at music, photos, anything. You're stuck with your folder that has your binary and your images in a documents folder. And so as a part of that, whenever you go to the background, the OS enforces that and writes itself to disk. And then so you can't run any code in the background unless the system lets you, which it really doesn't ever let you. And then all of your stuff is saved for you. And so you don't have any choice over your application to terminate or not. It just does. And then same thing with where you're allowed to save files and stuff is you don't get any choice in what folder you have. You just have the one it gave you. It's kind of limiting somewhat. And as a developer, it's a nuisance because I can't modify things I want to modify. But as an end user, I'm really, really happy things can't arbitrarily modify my phone. So it's a kind of a mixed bag. So now that we have this here, we're going to add this to our Alliance friends. Add object, and we'll add our profile. So we've added a profile, and we need to notify our table of an update. So you can just call reload data on the table view and do it like this, and it's just going to appear. But that's not really pretty, and that's not really what iOS is all about. So instead, we're going to insert it. So we'll do insert row at index path, and this is an array of index paths, so you can do a lot, but we're just going to do one. Index path for row. Yes, thank you. Index path for row. Chris, I told you I only had 12 gigabytes of free disk space. You can't just record 1080p video like that. All right, so index path for row, and we're going to use alliance friends.count -1 in section alliance friends section. And then row animation, we're just going to let it do automatic. Yeah, it's just a fade. We can do fade. There's a few other built-in animations. So this now works as an alert, but we have to actually call the alert. So just like our navigation item for our left bar button item, we can set a right bar button item, and we can set that to run our add person. So right bar button item equals self dot, let's see what we got here, UI bar button item, which is the name of the bar buttons, init with, we'll do a title. We're going to do, actually I don't want a title, I want the little system plus button. Init with bar button system item, UI bar button system item add. And we want the target object to have a method called on it to be self. And then the method we want to call, also called a selector, is add person. So now we run this. We'll have a plus button. I can say, let's add Chris Tebow,
I always
and
wanted to be a part of the Alliance.
not a part of the Alliance.
Save it in the mail.
Yep. And so now you're down here, and you're in the friends section, not a part of the Alliance, just so you know. You also don't have a profile picture because that's how much I think of you.
Well, could you look me up to the Alliance?
I can, but I'm going to give you a profile picture first. So we're going to go back up into where we actually generate the cell and turn off this little side view. So down here where we actually set the image is we can determine what section we're in. And so I'm just going to copy that for the switch statement. And we will put this in the, oh, that's my bad, that's not where that needed. Okay, so we'll do if current profile dot profile image dot length to see if there's actually anything in there for the image name. And if there is, then we'll set it from here, which is what we were doing before. And then if there's not, then we will cell dot image view dot image, and we will give it one that we make with that little thing that makes little circles like iOS 8. So we'll do FTI Alliance profile, and we will do profile placeholder for name, and we'll pass it current profile dot name. And the size of these images, although I didn't tell you guys, was I think 44 by 44. And so now we run this. If there's not a profile picture name available, it's going to make one. So we'll add Chris Tebow and can be a part of the Alliance. And he'll be down here in Friends, and see now he has this little circle icon with a little CT in it that we rendered. And again, all this is online, so if you actually want to see how it's rendered, you can. We'll hit edit, and so now I can drag him into the Alliance, and we will take Skywalker out, because when you have Chris who needs Skywalker, and we'll put him down here in Friends, and we'll hit done, and we've exchanged these two items between arrays, and it was all animated. And so if I go down here and I can actually just delete Luke, and then we don't have Luke anymore. And so this is a pretty quick overview of table views. We've implemented just about every single method possible in a table view, short of a couple of duplicates like a section header versus a section footer. But this is the most complicated control in iOS. And that's the reason we picked it for our first workshop, is it covers a little bit of everything. It covers how do you deal with delegates and callbacks, how do you deal with navigation bars and buttons, how do you deal with putting pictures in, how do you deal with creating cells, and how do you deal with alerts, and then booting up an app and doing some theming. So does anyone have any questions on the table? Yeah.
This isn't, I guess, a table view question, but and I guess several people here might not be aware, but a lot of the delegate methods and APIs that are used for table views are also used for
Collections.
views. And maybe you're going to talk about this later in the class, but
Yep.
is there, aside from the way it looks, are there APIs that are available in table views that aren't in collection views or vice versa?
There are a ton in collection views that aren't available in table views. So table views have a built-in layout engine. They do a one-dimensional column layout. That's all they do. You can do a cell. They always take up the full width of the table view. In a collection view, you can use one of the built-in layouts that'll like grid everything for you, but you can also define your own layout. And so if I wanted to make all of my cells in the shape of like circles or stars on screen and just spiral them around, I could actually do that and put them on screen, and a collection view would let me. It's a two-dimensional versus one-dimensional element, and so it also allows you to customize layout, cell locations. You can add springs to cells so that if you have messages on your iPhone and you like scroll and it like springs like that, they use a collection view, and you can add spring and gravity to it and things like that. And if you've ever used the Photos app in iPad, it's also a collection view or iPhone, and it has everything in a grid. And so it's very similar to a table view, but it's one of those controls that the table view used to be the one everyone hated. Now the collection view is what everyone hated, and everyone's kind of okay with the table view now. But it'll be something we do cover later.
Yeah, I started working on something, I haven't gotten that in depth in collection view, but I was using it for, I guess, launch points for different view controllers.
Yeah.
And so I haven't worked with a lot of stuff you mentioned, but I was kind of surprised that, being familiar with table views.
Yeah, it's pretty easy pickup.
Very similar as far as like working with.
Yeah. And well, see, what a lot of people are doing now, especially your trendy apps that do a lot of custom cells, is they may look like table views, but they're not actually table views. They're rendering collection views into custom layouts to kind of get a little bit more control over spacings and alignments. And so they're doing some, you have a lot more control over the layout versus just a column.
Collection view the full width of the screen?
Yeah, you can make it anything you want. You can do your custom layout, or you can use the included layout.
So my question, I mean, I don't know, what would you use it for? What do you, other than,
The table?
yeah, the table view? what do you use it
So do you have an iPhone by chance?
for? No, I don't.
Okay, so when I open this up, just a quick, actually, let me pull up the simulator.
All the detailed view controller setup is-
Yeah, and so I was going to say, just about everything in iOS is based off of either a table view or a collection. If you go in the settings app, there's a table view here, just a little bit different style one. If you go into contacts, there's a table view here. If you go into Game Center, there's a table view. Passbook is a themed collection view, table view thing. Maps, if you go into Maps and you do any kind of searches, like Columbia, all of your search results are in table views. If you...
What kind of map program do you have for this?
Apple Maps. You can also get the Google Maps SDK or the Bing Maps SDK. There's an ArcGIS SDK, but don't tell anyone, it really sucks. So I stick with Apple Maps.
Talk a little bit about hybrid apps and all?
I don't believe in hybrid apps. It's against my religion. Yeah, so I tend to go with Zuckerberg made a quote in 2012, hybrid apps were the biggest mistake Facebook made in their history. And I firmly believe that because there's no way to get a good performing hybrid app. You can get one that's not offensively performing. You can never get one that performs well. And like a lot of the things like you noticed in our, that's the wrong thing. If you look in here, like whenever I would do this and things would automatically switch and change font weights, these things change per OS version. Like between 7.0 and 7.1, these things change. And the frameworks on the OS will update their UIs, behaviors, animation curves, speeds, all of that. If you do a hybrid app, you're dealing with whoever wrote the JavaScript that's interfacing with it, and it's going to be a year, year and a half before your library ever gets updated to hopefully be close to parity. It's not going to feel like an app native to the platform.
But your Safari, you have Safari browser on here, right?
Yes.
So it's running the WebKit.
Yes.
So it's pretty standard, right?
Um,
So I could write one app and it could run.
Well, so there's an argument against that, is that notice an iPhone app looks different than an Android app. And for good reason. The platforms had different expectations, they had different theming, they had different behaviors, they had different button styles, different buttons, different ways to do menus. If you build one app with the intention of shooting everywhere, you're going to satisfy no one in the process. And so if you're dealing with an enterprise app, there's an argument to be made for a hybrid application because you're just dealing with enterprise users who need to like input data. And you need it to be available everywhere. But for a user point of view, not only does it not respond quickly, you have about a half a second touch delay on WebKit from processing touches. It looks nothing like any other app on their platform. It's not near as fast as other apps. It doesn't animate as well. It doesn't look like anything. It doesn't behave like anything.
As far as the
Yeah.
iPhone, it looks different.
Right. It all looks and behaves differently. Buttons behave differently, different touch areas. And so you end up with an app that looks nothing like an iPhone app, and users don't like it. And not only does it perform bad, it just doesn't look right. And so
this is just something that's been
Yeah.
that's been very highly debated amongst the mobile community because obviously with a single developer, a single application is easier to write and maintain. So 52 Inc. We stand on the side of the fence that native on every platform, but we don't necessarily say that there's no place for a hybrid application on every platform. We just don't do it. And this series is going to focus on native iOS application development.
yeah.
One of the other things, this gets to what Brandon was talking about, with a lot of the hybrid apps, a large majority of them use the Cordova framework. And that framework sits on top of the OS level APIs. So you're inserting a API layer between the code and
Yeah.
what you would be running in native. So there's one more separation between your code and what's running, which could introduce a lot of
Yeah.
the delays you're talking about.
Yeah, it is. And WebKit has delays. Your abstraction layer has delays. And then
Depending on the Cordova open
Yeah.
source group to update that library. So like when iOS 8 comes out, there's probably going to be a lag at some point.
Yeah, and that's actually where we're hitting at right now. Is iOS 8 is coming out in a month and a half. They still haven't completely caught up with iOS 7 yet. And so they're going to be lapped by about a year and a half. So anything, you're going to be building iOS 6 looking applications coming into iOS 8 with these hybrid tools. And it just kind of, for consumers and end users, just kind of an icky feeling. For enterprise, I'm totally on board with the hybrid app for enterprise because experience doesn't matter so much
That's
as
where the big
availability.
ones are usually, you know.
Right, exactly.
Like, I mean, like, I haven't really looked for an iPhone job or anything like that. But are there that many of them?
There are a ton of them. Yeah, they're just about any city you look at in the U.S., there's a huge shortage of iPhone
I know
developers.
Bank of America's hiring, but
Yeah, and so, but the unfortunate, well, I guess the fortunate thing is most of them are for consumers, and so a lot of them are native. And unfortunately, what I've noticed, because I have some friends that are web developers, and they're amazing web developers, and so since they don't know code and memory management, they build hybrid apps. And so what's happened is, although they're some of the best web developers I've ever known, they work somewhere building a hybrid app for 6 months until they get feedback from their users that it sucked, and they get fired, and they move on to the next one. And so it comes down to, yes, you may spend 6 or 8 months and launch a hybrid app, but a year later you're going to be redoing it, and was it worth the investment cost? For enterprise internal usage, hybrid's fine. I have no problem with that. It's just
I
personal
guess
experience
the
there.
thing is to build a hybrid app and then have another app that converts.
Just about,
Well, it's like with the Facebook apps, they had HTML
yeah,
apps
they had to rewrite it.
on all the platforms, and then they converted the iOS app, and there was a huge performance increase, and then within 6 months, they updated the Android app to native.
Yeah, it really was an amazing, amazing performance difference.
how similar is this code to running code for the Mac?
So the language itself is the same. The UI libraries are nothing like it. So you have UI Kit, which is everything it prefixed with UI. Yeah, exactly. It's like, OS 10 is based off of Next Step, which was developed in the late 80s, early 90s. And so if you actually develop on OS 10, everything you touch is prefixed with Next Step because they just left it. And so it's kind of a thought process of early 90s as far as development. And I hate to say it, but if you compare it to something new like .NET, OS 10 development is painful. But what they did is they learned whenever they wrote UI Kit brand new in 2006 that there are better ways of thinking of things and better paradigms. And so UI Kit is like a refined version of what OS 10 is. A lot of them are very similar, especially the new things, but it's different enough that you just kind of want to hit your head against the wall periodically, but it's not insurmountable.
We're all crossing our fingers that there will be some unity one day.
Yeah, because they
I guess,
keep...
the big thing about the new language they came out with, which maybe a year or so, is
Yeah.
the binaries are compatible with Objective-C, and the language is much easier and like basically, I don't know, all our APIs aren't there yet, but
Yeah.
I kind of like this better myself.
I do too. I'm not.
Because, I mean, it's more C-like, it's more Java-like, it's more JavaScript-like.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of Swift myself yet, just because it has a lot of performance issues right now.
There are too many basic things in there for me.
Yeah, it's more difficult. And actually, so did anyone happen to catch any of the performance metrics that Apple advertised on Swift, and how it was like amazingly like a little bit faster than C and all this awesome stuff? Well, it turns out that's the case if you turn off every single safe checking feature of the compiler. And it's really unsafe to run code that way. And so what happens is if you leave it all on defaults, like shipping an application, and you write a sort algorithm in C and a sort algorithm in Swift, the sort algorithm in C processed like the few thousand elements in like 0.06 seconds. Swift took 88 seconds. And so when you leave it on default, it's just nowhere near production ready for anything that requires performance yet. And so I'll be sticking with Objective-C for a while.
When they compared it to Objective-C, which produces the same binary, was the Objective-C number with the default
Yes.
turned on and the other one?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It was just trying to like showcase it, and yeah, that's cool, but then why use Swift if you're not going to get any of the safety features?
Y'all, I'm gonna have to cut the recording off.